When I first came to Auto Pacific, this is probably one of the first things I heard from George. Without facts, it's just an opinion. The car industry has a ton of experts. A lot of them restating the obvious, and then a lot of them trying to push things that they really don't have any data for. This year, Auto Pacific's going to reach out to over 100,000 consumers during the course of the year. So when we talk, we try our best to talk from the data. So let's look into it over these presentations. Let's look and see how we collected this data. We have 3 internal sources at Auto Pacific. First is what we call competitive intelligence, which is eautopacific.com. Ed Kim is going to tell you more about that in detail. But essentially that is competitive intelligence and sales forecasting. It's a cornerstone of our company, started back in 1986. George actually started doing that in his living room, and that's what created the company. The second area we gather our information from is what we call the the New Vehicle Satisfaction Survey. Some of you know that as the Research Suite. It's an annual survey. We'll go into the details of that in a few minutes. And then the third area is our Vehicle Voice Internet Panel. That's a continual collection of information from new vehicle owners throughout the United States, actually all vehicle owners throughout the United States. All those will be put together in the presentations that you'll see going forward. So let's get started with the New Vehicle Satisfaction Survey. We've conducted this survey since 1994. This year's sample has 68,000 respondents, the best in our history. Approximately 16,000 of those were contacted via mail, and the balance, or 52,000, were contacted via the internet and performed their survey on the internet. It's essentially an 8-page survey that goes into a considerable amount of detail. I'm going to tell you a bit of the detail, but not all of the detail, because it would just be too much for the amount of time that we have, but just so you can know where we're coming from. We get the names for these surveys directly from the manufacturers. So we have permission from all the manufacturers that participate in the survey to send these surveys out. Essentially, it's people who acquired their vehicle during the first part of the model year, so September through December, and we survey them January through, say, March, April. So we're certain that at that point, they've had at least 90 days of ownership. They understand their vehicle, they've been with their vehicle, they're starting to form opinions about their vehicle that are beyond the showroom and the happiness of the showroom. So what we use for an incentive is a sweepstakes. The old dollar bill thing doesn't seem to work as well anymore. We did internet research and found out that a sweepstakes is the best way to do it. And our sweepstakes essentially we'll pay your car payment for a year, which works very well because a lot of these people are working on their 3rd or 4th new car payment, which was probably considerably more than the one they had before. So it really works well with response rates. This last year we had 8% response rates on the internet, on the mail survey, and 10% on the internet. So in terms of cost reduction, adding the internet has been helpful. In terms of changing the sample too, the common criticism of mail is that mail is older people. Well, now we have a combination of both, and we're slowly but surely getting the sample to what we call the perfect world. Essentially, everybody conducting this research on the internet, which will be perfect. The data is available now, which is just recently, within the last 2 weeks. And so everything you see in terms of consumer research for the rest of the day will be taken from the 2011 survey, okay? So now what's in the survey? We're not going to go through the survey, as I mentioned, but we're going to cover some of the key points that are in the survey. First of all is the shopping process. We measure the importance of 57 different characteristics that are important in the purchase process. This will play a key role later when we talk about our vehicle satisfaction awards and vehicle satisfaction in general, but we want to know, of the 57, which ones were the most important, and that can change by segment, it changes by demographic. So it's a really way of sort of weighting what's the most important thing when people purchase a vehicle. We also look at influencers, everything from Twitter to my cousin, and we measure 22 different influencers in the purchase process. We also check for the other vehicles that they shop for and their second choice vehicle and why a vehicle might have been rejected. Okay, so if you can look up your vehicle, for instance, and see what are the main reasons why that our vehicle didn't sell to those people who chose not to buy your vehicle. After the shopping process, we get some basic purchase information. We want to know their previous vehicle, whether or not they held on to that previous vehicle or they traded that previous vehicle in. Then we get information about their household fleet, so we know what other vehicles are in their fleet. Obviously in the United States, vehicle fleet's very important because people buy vehicles for different reasons when they have other vehicles that perform other purposes. Then we get purchase price, whether they paid for it in full, whether they financed it, whether they leased it, the term. And it's interesting because we do our own internal screening when we actually go through the mail surveys to screen the data. And sometimes you'll see somebody with an $1,800 payment for 72 months. You just look at that and go, wow, you must really love this vehicle, you know. And then you see the more reasonable ones, but. Okay, after purchase information, we talk about ownership and vehicle uses. We want to find out if this is their first new vehicle. Is this somebody coming from new to used? From used to new. We want to find out if it's the first new vehicle by the brand, so whether or not it's Conquest. We get a calculation of how often you're conquesting, which models that you have the Conquest. And then we look into vehicle uses. We track 15 different vehicle uses on an ongoing basis. Vehicle uses obviously very, very much depending upon segment. And then we gather some other information that helps a lot with our tier 1 suppliers is the time in the vehicle. In other words, what their commute is and how much time they spend in their vehicles. That's very important for the type of vehicle that somebody's willing to purchase. Are they going to be in their vehicle 90 minutes a day commuting? And then how long do they plan to keep their vehicle? And we're watching that number. I get asked that question a lot recently, but people are planning to keep their vehicles longer than they were in the past for obvious reasons. As you know, there's websites now that help you figure out what are the best ways to make your vehicle last longer. Not something that we all necessarily want to hear in this business, but it's the truth of it. And then more information about their new vehicle. Now it's their overall satisfaction. Okay, we use that for our vehicle satisfaction awards. We take the same 47 attributes, the most important attributes to those consumers in their purchase, and then we measure how satisfied they are on those same 47 attributes after the fact. And that's how we come up with our vehicle satisfaction awards. But it's also good because the individual attributes, you can see how well you scored. You know, if you're in a segment where third row seat is extremely important, you can see your satisfaction with third row seat and see whether or not the next gen vehicle needs some changes to it. Which leads me to changes. Desired changes is another area. After people have had a vehicle for a while, they start to get an opinion about, you know, gosh, the glove box is not big enough, or whatever the case might be. It's usually things like rear seat roominess, or ride and comfort, or power and acceleration. We ask them whether they'd like to change those. Deborah will go into an analysis of a few vehicles that have had major model changes recently, and you're going to be able to see whether or not the changes that we all see as product planners and researchers that happen to that vehicle, we see those changes, but Deborah's going to go in and show you whether or not those changes were actually improvements or not. And then we also look at vehicle modifications. We work with the Specialty Equipment Market Association to make sure that we're measuring the right modifications, to try to find out which modifications are the most important to people who purchase a new vehicle. And then the basics about the owner. Demographics, psychographic. Our psychographic battery has actually grown to be rather large. It includes 25 different views on driving that we track, 35 personal activities that we've tracked for years, and then also 12 of the hottest technologies. We typically find that technology ownership varies by segment, age group, and it can have a lot to do with whether or not your vehicle is the appropriate one to add technology. We've seen a lot of technology added at the lower end in terms of segments, but different brands probably have different affinities to having technology at the lower end. We have the data that can help support that. And then we also look into non-automotive brands. We measure 25 different non-automotive brands and how they interplay with your brand. Not necessarily for only co-branding reasons, but if IKEA shows up a lot with your owners, it makes sense. Volvo did a Costco connection a couple of years ago. It made absolute sense because of Volvo owners, they were number 5 in Costco, was number 5 on their list in terms of their relationship with Costco. So the Volvo Costco ownership made a lot of sense. Paying attention to this sort of information is interesting. Everything from Apple Computer even to Tom's. And then to finalize out the survey, this is what makes Auto Pacific unique. We don't just talk about the current, we talk about the future. So we go into things like future brand consideration, future segment consideration, the price on their next vehicle their purchase, and then what sort of features they want in it. We have a considerable amount of historical information on the demand for hybrids or EVs, other alternative fueled vehicles, and how much people are willing to pay for those going forward. So, and that, in addition to that, 100 other features that Auto Pacific tracks, and that's everything from satellite radio to power third row seat. It's really sort of the product planner's Bible in terms of putting together product and how consumers demand it. So that basically covers what we call the research suite new vehicles satisfaction survey. You'll see references to this database in the bottom of a lot of the slides that you'll see today. So that's the approach. Also, too, today when you leave, you will receive a booklet that has a copy of our survey. You'll receive a catalog that tells about our services, including George's reference, and Ed will also reference the accuracy of our forecast period. I don't know of any other research company or forecasting company that publishes their accuracy. And we've got a 10-year accuracy published in the booklet to show you. And there's some other ancillary materials as well. Barry's information on his research is in that packet. So you get a white packet at the end, they'll have all this, so you don't have to take notes, I should say. One more thing I'd like to talk about would be vehicle voice. Okay, vehicle voice is how we keep the pulse of essentially the automotive market on a regular basis. Okay, and how we do that is that we have a panel of new vehicle owners, about 25,000. We keep them engaged through a blog, but we also keep them engaged by giving them incentives to fill out surveys. George will talk in the future a bit about our bi-monthly fuel price impact survey. We use this tool, Vehicle Voice, to get feedback from consumers as the prices change in fuel. And you might see some pretty interesting surprises in how people are reacting to changes in fuel price. We measure future future segment consideration, powertrain consideration, whether or not people are going to change their vehicle based on what they see in current fuel prices. So it's very important because it can be done more on a regular basis. And then we'll also use this to periodically gauge just what are open issues in the automotive industry. Things like recalls, safety issues, or reactions to EVs, how people are feeling about things like that. So in a nutshell, that's basically it. Those are the approaches that we use for the quantitative data we have here. So from here, let's go on to Ed, and Ed will work first on the methodology of our competitive intelligence and then take it from there.